Welcome. Tonight, we're traveling nearly 2,000 years into the past to investigate one of the greatest mysteries of the Roman Empire, the disappearance of the Ninth Legion, the Roman army unit that vanished without a trace. For centuries, historians have argued about what happened to the Ninth Legion. Unlike many military disasters of the ancient world, there is no surviving account describing its destruction. No historian tells us where it died. No monument records its final battle. No Roman emperor left behind an explanation. The legion simply appears in the historical record for generations, fighting across the Roman world, and then, almost without warning, disappears. That absence has inspired countless theories. Some believe the legion was wiped out in northern Britain while campaigning against tribes beyond Rome's frontier. Others argue it survived Britain entirely and met its end somewhere in the east. A few historians think the answer may be far less dramatic, that the legion was quietly reorganized and absorbed into the vast machinery of the Roman military. The truth is that nobody knows for certain. To understand why the disappearance of a single legion became one of history's most enduring mysteries, we first need to understand what a Roman legion actually was. When modern people hear the word legion, they often imagine a large group of soldiers marching beneath red banners. While that image is not entirely wrong, a Roman legion was much more than an army unit. It was a community. A legion contained thousands of men, soldiers, officers, engineers, surveyors, doctors, blacksmiths, carpenters, clerks, and countless support personnel all lived and worked together. Some soldiers would spend 20 years or more serving under the same Eagle standard. Many enlisted as young men and knew no other life until retirement. A legion developed its own traditions and reputation over decades, sometimes centuries. Victories became part of its identity. Defeats became stories told around campfires. New recruits inherited the legacy of the men who came before them. In many ways, a legion resembled a small traveling city. And among all the legions that served Rome, few possessed a history as long and distinguished as the Ninth. The exact origins of the Ninth Legion remain uncertain. Ancient records from the final decades of the Roman Republic are incomplete, and historians continue to debate the legion's earliest years. Most scholars believe it was raised sometime during the turbulent 1st century BC, a period when Rome was rapidly expanding and political tensions were beginning to tear the Republic apart. This was an age of powerful generals, ambitious politicians, and nearly constant warfare. The Republic that had once ruled much of the Mediterranean was becoming increasingly unstable. Rival leaders competed for influence. Alliances formed and collapsed. Armies that were supposed to serve the state often became loyal to individual commanders instead. Among those commanders, one figure would change Roman history forever: Julius Caesar. Caesar remains one of the most famous individuals in human history, but during his own lifetime, his future was far from certain. He was a politician, a military commander, and a man driven by extraordinary ambition. Many historians believe that the Ninth Legion served under Caesar during his campaigns in Gaul, a vast region that roughly corresponds to modern-day France and parts of neighboring countries. If that is true, the soldiers of the Ninth would have participated in one of the most important military campaigns of the ancient world. Beginning in 58 BC, Caesar launched a series of wars that lasted for years. His armies fought tribal coalitions, crossed major rivers, built massive fortifications and pushed Roman influence deeper into Western Europe than ever before. The fighting was often brutal. Ancient sources describe sieges that lasted for months, entire settlements destroyed, and armies numbering in the tens of thousands. Roman soldiers marched enormous distances carrying heavy equipment. They built roads, bridges, and camps wherever they went. Life in the legion was difficult. A soldier might spend days marching through rain before constructing a fortified camp each evening. He could wake before sunrise, train for hours, and then continue marching again. Military discipline was strict, and punishments could be severe. Yet this discipline was one of the reasons Rome became so successful. Roman armies were not necessarily stronger than every enemy they faced. They were often outnumbered. Sometimes they fought in unfamiliar terrain. What made them exceptional was organization, training, and persistence. The Ninth Legion developed its reputation in this environment. For years, its soldiers fought alongside some of the most experienced troops in the Roman world. They learned how to endure hardship, how to construct defenses quickly, and how to remain effective even during chaotic battles. Those lessons would serve them well in the decades to come. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. The murder shocked the Roman world. A group of senators believed they were saving the Republic from tyranny. Instead, they unleashed another wave of instability. Civil war followed. Competing factions fought for power. Former allies became enemies. New armies were raised. Entire regions of the Roman world were drawn into conflict. Through these turbulent years, the Ninth Legion appears to have survived. The Republic itself did not. Eventually, power consolidated in the hands of Caesar's adopted heir, Augustus. Under his rule, Rome transitioned from republic to empire. The political transformation was immense. For ordinary citizens, daily life often continued much as before. But behind the scenes, the structure of Roman government had fundamentally changed. Augustus understood something important. If Rome was going to maintain control over its enormous territories, it needed a permanent professional army. The legions became the backbone of that system. Stationed across the empire, they guarded frontiers, suppressed rebellions, protected trade routes, and projected Roman power into distant regions. The Ninth Legion continued to serve. Years turned into decades. Veterans retired and were replaced by younger recruits. Commanders came and went. Emperors rose and fell. Yet the Legion endured. Its banners passed from one generation to the next. By the time the 1st century AD arrived, the Ninth had already accumulated a history longer than many kingdoms. Then Rome set its sights on a new frontier, Britain. To Roman leaders, Britain represented both an opportunity and a challenge. The island sat beyond the northern edge of the empire. Traders had visited its shores for generations, and Roman politicians were well aware of its existence. But conquering Britain was an entirely different matter. Previous attempts had achieved little. Even Caesar's expeditions to the island, nearly a century earlier, had resulted in limited long-term gains. For decades, Britain remained beyond Roman control. That changed during the reign of Emperor Claudius. In 43 AD, a large Roman invasion force crossed the English Channel and began the conquest of Britain. Several legions participated. The campaign was ambitious, expensive, and politically important. A successful invasion would strengthen Claudius's reputation and expand Roman influence. The initial stages of the conquest went relatively well. Roman forces defeated several tribal coalitions and established footholds across southern Britain. But conquering territory was one thing, holding it was another. Britain presented unique challenges. The climate was harsher than much of the Mediterranean world. Dense forests covered large areas. Roads were limited. Communication could be difficult. Many local tribes remained hostile to Roman rule. For Roman soldiers accustomed to warmer regions, Britain could feel like the edge of civilization. Rain, mud, and cold became constant companions. Yet the Ninth Legion adapted. Like countless Roman units before it, it established forts, built infrastructure, and helped expand imperial control. Its soldiers spent years patrolling roads, guarding settlements, and participating in military operations across the province. For a time, it appeared that Rome's grip on Britain was becoming secure. Then everything changed. In 60 or 61 AD, one of the most famous rebellions in Roman history erupted. Its leader was a queen, Boudica. Following a series of disputes and abuses by Roman authorities, anger spread among several tribes. Boudica emerged as the symbol of resistance. Ancient historians describe massive tribal forces gathering behind her. Roman settlements were attacked. Entire towns burned. The province descended into chaos. One of the settlements destroyed during the rebellion was Londinium, the city that would eventually become London. Another was Camulodunum, one of the most important Roman centers in Britain. The destruction shocked Roman authorities. For a brief period, it appeared possible that the entire province might be lost. The Ninth Legion became directly involved in the crisis. A force associated with the legion attempted to confront the rebels. The outcome was disastrous. Ancient accounts suggest that much of its infantry was destroyed. Only a portion of the force managed to escape. For any military unit, such losses would have been devastating. Yet the Ninth survived. Reinforcements arrived. Its ranks were rebuilt. Its eagle standard remained standing. And despite the disaster, the Legion continued serving in Britain. What nobody could have known at the time was that this would not be the last chapter in the Ninth Legion's remarkable story. Its greatest mystery still lay decades in the future. And when that mystery finally emerged, it would leave historians debating its fate for nearly 2,000 years. The decades following Boudica's rebellion were some of the most important in the history of Roman Britain. Rome had survived the crisis, but the revolt had exposed a difficult truth. Conquering Britain was not the same as controlling it. The empire could win battles, build roads, and establish towns. Yet large parts of the island remained restless. Beyond the areas firmly held by Rome lived tribes who had little interest in becoming part of the empire. For the Ninth Legion, these years were filled with work rather than glory. Much of a Roman soldier's life was surprisingly ordinary. Popular imagination often focuses on great battles, heroic charges, and famous victories. In reality, soldiers spent far more time building than fighting. A legion on campaign could construct roads, bridges, watchtowers, walls, and forts. It could clear forests, dig ditches, survey land, and transport supplies. Roman armies were not simply military forces. They were engineering organizations capable of transforming entire landscapes. The soldiers of the Ninth Legion likely spent thousands of hours with shovels and axes in their hands. A new recruit entering the legion would quickly discover that military life involved endless labor. Each evening, when an army halted for the night, a fortified camp was often constructed. Ditches were dug, earthworks were raised, defensive positions were established. The process was repeated again and again, day after day, year after year. It was exhausting work, but it helped explain why Roman armies remained effective for centuries. A Roman commander knew that even if his soldiers found themselves in hostile territory, they could create a defensible position before nightfall. The system saved countless lives. By the late 1st century AD, the 9th Legion had become one of the key military forces stationed in northern Britain. This was where Rome's greatest challenges remained. The further north Roman armies advanced, the more difficult conditions became. The landscape changed. Rolling hills gave way to rugged terrain. Thick forests covered parts of the countryside. Rivers and marshes complicated movement. Supply lines became longer and harder to protect. Most importantly, Rome was approaching territories occupied by tribes that had never fully accepted Roman authority. These peoples lived beyond the edge of secure imperial control. To Roman writers, they often appeared mysterious. Descriptions from the period portray fierce warriors, capable of moving quickly through difficult terrain and striking unexpectedly. Modern historians know that many Roman accounts exaggerated the differences between Romans and their enemies. Even so, there is little doubt that campaigning in northern Britain was difficult. A Roman army could march into hostile territory and suddenly find itself cut off from easy support. Roads might be limited. Weather could change rapidly. Visibility could be poor. An enemy familiar with the landscape possessed significant advantages. The 9th Legion operated in this environment for years. One of its most important bases was at Eboracum, the Roman settlement that would eventually become the city of York. Today, York is known for its medieval streets and historic architecture. In Roman times, it was one of the most important military centers in Britain. From there, Roman governors coordinated campaigns and managed operations across the north. The 9th Legion became deeply connected to the region. Generations of soldiers passed through its fortress. Some arrived as young recruits from distant provinces. Others retired after decades of service. Many never saw Italy. Many never returned home. Their world became the frontier. Imagine standing guard on a cold night outside the walls of Eboracum. The wind moves across the countryside. The sky is dark. Beyond the limits of Roman control lies a vast landscape that few people in Rome will ever see. The capital of the empire is hundreds of miles away. The emperor is a distant figure. Orders arrive slowly, and if trouble appears on the frontier, the soldiers standing watch will face it first. For men serving in the 9th Legion, this was reality. The frontier was not an abstract idea. It was home. Around this time, Roman Britain continued to expand. Military campaigns pushed further north. Fortresses were established in new regions. Road networks connected distant positions. The empire appeared strong. Yet beneath the surface, tensions remained. Rome's northern frontier was never truly peaceful. Small conflicts, raids, and local uprisings occurred regularly. Many never entered the historical record. Ancient historians often focused on emperors and major wars, leaving countless smaller events undocumented. This absence of information creates one of the greatest challenges when studying the Ninth Legion. We know a great deal about Rome. We know a great deal about certain emperors. But when it comes to the everyday experiences of individual legions, the evidence becomes much thinner. The story must often be reconstructed from inscriptions, military records, archaeological discoveries, and scattered references in ancient texts. Sometimes, a single carved stone becomes incredibly important. A damaged inscription may reveal where a legion was stationed. A military diploma might provide clues about troop movements. A collection of stamped roof tiles can help historians identify which unit occupied a particular fort. The fate of the Ninth Legion would eventually depend on exactly this kind of evidence. For centuries, people assumed they knew what happened. The explanation seemed straightforward. The legion had been stationed in northern Britain. The region was dangerous. The historical record became silent. Therefore, many concluded that the legion must have been destroyed there. It was an appealing theory. An entire Roman legion, perhaps 5,000 men or more, marching into hostile territory and never returning. The idea captured imaginations. It sounded like the perfect historical mystery. Novelists embraced it. Filmmakers embraced it. Documentaries repeated it. The image of Roman soldiers disappearing into the wilderness became deeply rooted in popular culture. But history is rarely that simple. And in the 20th century, archaeologists began uncovering evidence that challenged the entire story. The discoveries did not occur in Britain. They occurred hundreds of miles away, in the Netherlands. At the city of Nijmegen, archaeologists found evidence connected to the Ninth Legion. Among the discoveries were inscriptions and construction materials associated with the unit. The findings suggested something remarkable. The legion may have been transferred out of Britain entirely. If that interpretation was correct, one of the most popular theories about the legion's disappearance immediately became problematic. A legion cannot be destroyed in Britain if it later appears on the European continent. The discovery forced historians to reconsider decades of assumptions. Perhaps the Ninth Legion had survived its service in Britain after all. Perhaps it had simply been moved. Military transfers were not unusual. Roman legions frequently relocated when strategic priorities changed. An emperor facing trouble elsewhere in the empire might order experienced troops to a new frontier. The Ninth Legion certainly possessed experience. After generations of service, it had become one of Rome's veteran military formations. If it left Britain, where did it go next? That question remains difficult to answer. The evidence becomes frustratingly sparse. We know the legion existed. We know it served in Britain. We have indications that it may have appeared in the Netherlands. Then, once again, the trail grows cold. And this is where the mystery becomes even more fascinating. Because if the Ninth Legion survived Britain, its disappearance may have occurred somewhere completely different. Some historians have suggested the eastern provinces. Others point toward conflicts along the Danube frontier. A few propose that the legion may have been involved in wars that generated little surviving documentation. The early 2nd century AD was not an era of complete peace. Rome still faced threats across its vast borders. Rebellions erupted. Foreign powers challenged imperial authority. Armies marched. Soldiers died. Entire campaigns have vanished from history because the records did not survive. The Ninth Legion could easily have participated in one of these forgotten conflicts. And if it suffered catastrophic losses, the evidence may simply have disappeared with time. Yet there is another possibility, one that is less dramatic, but perhaps more realistic. What if the Legion was never destroyed at all? What if the Ninth Legion simply ceased to exist as an administrative unit? Roman military organization was complex. Legions could be reorganized, units could be merged, names could disappear, even while soldiers continued serving. To modern observers, such changes can create the illusion of a mystery where none actually existed. A bureaucratic decision made nearly 2,000 years ago might explain the entire story. The challenge is that we do not possess enough evidence to know. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the Ninth Legion so intriguing. Unlike many historical questions, there is no final chapter waiting to be discovered in an ancient book. There is no surviving eyewitness account hidden in a forgotten archive. Instead, historians must work with fragments. A stone inscription here, a military record there, a damaged text written centuries ago. Piece by piece, they attempt to reconstruct the fate of a legion that seems to fade into the shadows. And as we continue our investigation, we will examine the strongest theories one by one, because somewhere between fact, speculation, and lost history lies the answer to one of Rome's greatest mysteries. The question is whether that answer still exists for us to find. Before we examine the theories surrounding the disappearance of the Ninth Legion, it is worth pausing to consider just how unusual this mystery really is. The Roman Empire was not a small kingdom operating on the edge of history. It was one of the largest and most organized states the ancient world had ever seen. Roman officials recorded taxes, military deployments, construction projects, legal decisions, and census information. Thousands of inscriptions have survived. Historians such as Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and others documented events across the empire. While many records have been lost, Rome still left behind an enormous amount of evidence compared to most ancient civilizations. This is what makes the fate of the Ninth Legion so fascinating. We are not talking about a forgotten tribe that disappeared into prehistory. We are talking about one of the Roman Empire's professional military units, a formation that may have existed for well over a century. Somehow, despite Rome's obsession with administration and record-keeping, the final fate of this legion remains uncertain. The most famous theory is also the oldest. According to this idea, the Ninth Legion was destroyed somewhere in northern Britain during the early 2nd century AD. The theory gained popularity because it appears to fit the available evidence. The legion was known to be stationed in Britain. Northern Britain was dangerous. Roman expansion into the region faced constant resistance. Then, after a certain point, references to the legion become increasingly difficult to find. For generations, historians connected these facts and imagined a dramatic ending. In this version of events, the Ninth Legion marches north into hostile territory, perhaps pursuing rebellious tribes or attempting to secure Roman control beyond existing frontiers. At some point, disaster strikes. The legion becomes trapped, surrounded, or overwhelmed. Thousands of soldiers are killed. Survivors, if there were any, never make it back to Roman territory. News of the catastrophe eventually reaches Rome, but the details are lost to history. It is an attractive theory because it feels like the kind of event people expect from the ancient world. There is drama, tragedy, and mystery all at once. The problem is that evidence supporting this theory remains surprisingly weak. Historians today are generally much more cautious than earlier generations. Modern archaeology has revealed that northern Britain was certainly dangerous, but there is no clear proof that the Ninth Legion met its end there. In fact, the discoveries at Nijmegen suggest that the Legion may have survived Britain altogether. If the Legion was transferred to the continent after its service in Britain, then the entire foundation of the traditional theory begins to crumble. The famous image of thousands of Roman soldiers disappearing into the misty wilderness may be compelling, but compelling stories are not always true. History often turns out to be far more complicated than legends. To understand what might have happened, it helps to consider the broader situation facing the Roman Empire during the early 2nd century AD. This was the age of Emperor Trajan, one of Rome's most successful rulers. Under his leadership, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. Roman armies campaigned in Dacia, a region located roughly in modern Romania. Later, they pushed deep into the east, fighting against the Parthian Empire. These campaigns required enormous numbers of troops. Legions were moved across vast distances. Soldiers from Britain could find themselves serving thousands of miles away in entirely different climates and cultures. A transfer from Britain to continental Europe would not have been unusual. In fact, it would have been perfectly normal within the Roman military system. Imagine a soldier who enlisted in the Ninth Legion as a young man. He might begin his career in Britain, spending years stationed along the frontier. He learns to endure cold weather, long patrols, and difficult campaigns. Then one day, new orders arrive. The Legion is needed elsewhere. Ships are prepared. Equipment is packed. The soldiers leave Britain behind and cross the sea. Months later, they may find themselves marching through completely different landscapes, surrounded by unfamiliar languages and customs. This kind of movement happened regularly throughout the empire. Rome was vast, and its army was constantly adapting to new challenges. Some historians believe the Ninth Legion may have eventually been sent east. If that happened, one possible explanation involves the Jewish revolts that shook the eastern provinces. The Roman Empire faced several major uprisings in that region, some of which were extremely costly. Entire cities were devastated. Roman forces suffered heavy casualties. Ancient sources occasionally mention military disasters without providing complete details. It is possible that the Ninth Legion participated in one of these conflicts and suffered destruction far from Britain. The difficulty is that direct evidence remains elusive. There is no surviving document that clearly states the Ninth Legion was destroyed here. Historians are left trying to connect scattered fragments of information across centuries. Another theory points toward the empire's northern and eastern frontiers, where Rome frequently clashed with powerful enemies. Beyond the Danube River lived various tribal groups capable of launching large-scale attacks. In the east stood the Parthian Empire, one of Rome's most formidable rivals. Wars along these frontiers could be brutal. Entire armies sometimes disappeared from the historical record. Communication over long distances was imperfect, and many official records have simply not survived. If the Ninth Legion was lost during one of these campaigns, it would help explain why its fate remains so difficult to trace today. Yet some researchers argue that historians may be searching for a dramatic ending that never existed. Human beings naturally prefer stories with clear conclusions. We like beginnings, climaxes, and endings. We want mysteries to have solutions. But history is not obligated to satisfy those desires. Sometimes institutions simply fade away. A military unit may be reorganized. Soldiers may be transferred into other formations. Administrative decisions made by officials nearly 2,000 years ago may leave confusing traces in the historical record. From a modern perspective, such changes can appear mysterious, even when they were entirely routine at the time. This possibility may sound disappointing compared to the image of a doomed legion vanishing in battle, but it deserves serious consideration. Roman military organization evolved constantly. New units were created. Others were dissolved. Some changed names. Others merged with existing formations. The Roman army that existed during the reign of Augustus was not identical to the army that existed a century later. Administrative reforms occurred throughout imperial history. If the Ninth Legion was absorbed into another unit or quietly removed from active service, the process might not have seemed important enough for contemporary writers to record in detail. The challenge is that every theory contains gaps. The destruction theory lacks definitive proof. The transfer theory explains some evidence, but not all of it. The administrative theory is plausible but difficult to demonstrate conclusively. Historians therefore find themselves in a rare position. They possess enough evidence to know that something unusual happened, but not enough evidence to determine exactly what it was. The result is a mystery that has survived for centuries. What makes the story even more remarkable is that the Ninth Legion is not remembered because of a famous victory. It is remembered because of uncertainty. Across the Roman world, countless legions fought wars, built fortresses, and served emperors. Most eventually disappeared through processes that historians can reasonably reconstruct. The Ninth is different. Its final chapter remains obscured. The Legion enters history clearly enough, serving under famous leaders and participating in major events. But its ending seems to dissolve into darkness. It is almost as if the historical record itself loses sight of the unit. For modern historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts, that uncertainty remains irresistible. Every new inscription, every excavation, every fragment of evidence has the potential to reshape our understanding of the mystery. A single discovery could change everything. Somewhere beneath a field, inside a forgotten ruin, or buried among thousands of uncatalogued artifacts, may lie a clue capable of revealing what happened to the Ninth Legion. Until such evidence emerges, the debate will continue, and the Legion will remain exactly what it has been for generations, one of the most enduring mysteries of the Roman Empire. One of the most interesting aspects of the Ninth Legion mystery is that it forces us to confront a reality that many people rarely consider when thinking about ancient history. We often imagine the Roman Empire as a civilization that has already been fully studied and understood. After all, Rome is one of the most researched societies in human history. Thousands of books have been written about its emperors, armies, cities, and wars. Entire careers have been devoted to studying even the smallest details of Roman life. Yet despite all of that scholarship, enormous gaps remain. There are moments when the evidence simply stops. Documents disappear, buildings crumble, records are lost, entire lives vanish from history. The mystery of the Ninth Legion survives because it exists within one of those gaps. To appreciate just how fragile historical knowledge can be, imagine standing in a Roman administrative office sometime during the 2nd century AD. Around you are shelves filled with documents. Military reports arrive from distant provinces. Tax records are copied by scribes. Governors send letters to Rome. Officers submit requests for supplies. Clerks record promotions, retirements, and transfers. Every day, new paperwork enters the system. To the people working there, these documents are ordinary. They are not thinking about future historians. They are simply doing their jobs. Yet, over the next 2,000 years, almost all of those records will disappear. Fires, floods, wars, neglect, and the simple passage of time will destroy the overwhelming majority of them. What survives is only a tiny fraction of what once existed. This is why the absence of evidence can be so frustrating. When historians discover that references to the Ninth Legion become increasingly rare, they cannot automatically assume that something extraordinary occurred. It is entirely possible that the explanation was once written down in a document that no longer exists. A report may have been sent to Rome. An officer may have described the legion's fate in detail. A governor may have recorded the transfer of its soldiers. Those records could have survived for centuries before eventually being lost. The silence that confronts us today may not have existed in antiquity at all. Even so, certain questions continue to trouble researchers. If the Ninth Legion survived into the 2nd century, why does its name disappear from later lists of Roman legions? Other units continue to appear in inscriptions and official records. The Ninth, by contrast, seems to fade away. This suggests that something significant happened. The challenge lies in determining exactly what that significant event might have been. Some historians have focused on the reign of Emperor Hadrian. When Hadrian came to power in 117 AD, he inherited an empire that had expanded enormously under his predecessor, Trajan. Rather than pursuing further conquests, Hadrian adopted a different strategy. He concentrated on securing and stabilizing Rome's borders. His reign is famous for major construction projects, including the massive defensive barrier known today as Hadrian's Wall. The wall stretched across northern Britain and represented a remarkable engineering achievement. Built of stone and turf, it was intended to regulate movement across the frontier and strengthen Roman control over the region. Thousands of soldiers participated in its construction. Forts, watchtowers, and defensive positions were established along its length. The project reflected a broader shift in Roman policy. Instead of endlessly expanding, the empire increasingly focused on defending what it already possessed. Some researchers have wondered whether the disappearance of the Ninth Legion might somehow be connected to these developments. Perhaps the legion suffered heavy losses during frontier conflicts that preceded the construction of the wall. Perhaps military reforms altered its structure. Perhaps its soldiers were redistributed among other units operating in Britain. Unfortunately, the available evidence does not provide definitive answers. What we do know is that life on Rome's frontiers could be extraordinarily dangerous. Modern maps often create the illusion that borders are fixed and clearly defined. Ancient frontiers were very different. They were often vast zones of interaction where traders, soldiers, travelers, and local populations came into contact. Violence could erupt suddenly. Raids could occur without warning. Small military detachments might disappear during patrols. Communication was slow compared to modern standards, and remote garrisons sometimes operated with considerable independence. For a Roman soldier stationed near the frontier, uncertainty was a constant companion. Imagine serving in a fort far from the great cities of the empire. News arrives weeks or months after events occur. Supplies occasionally run late. Rumors spread quickly through the ranks. One day you hear reports of unrest beyond the frontier. The next day, scouts fail to return. Then comes news of an attack somewhere nearby. Life continues, but tension is never far away. Many soldiers spent years living under such conditions. The 9th Legion almost certainly experienced this reality. Whether stationed in Britain, the Netherlands, or elsewhere, its soldiers belonged to a military culture that accepted danger as part of daily life. They marched through unfamiliar territories. They confronted enemies whose languages they could not understand. They endured harsh weather and long periods away from home. Some would never see their families again. When modern people hear the word legion, they often think in terms of large numbers. 5,000 soldiers, 6,000 soldiers, entire formations moving across the landscape. Yet each of those numbers represented individual lives. Every soldier had a personal story. Some joined for steady pay. Others sought adventure. Many hoped to earn Roman citizenship, land, or social advancement. Some enlisted because military service offered opportunities unavailable elsewhere. The disappearance of the 9th Legion therefore raises another question that often goes unasked. What happened to the men themselves? Even if the Legion ceased to exist as an official military unit, the soldiers did not simply vanish. Veterans would have retired. Survivors may have been transferred. Officers might have continued their careers elsewhere in the empire. If the Legion was destroyed in battle, then thousands of lives ended abruptly. If it was reorganized, then thousands of lives continued under different banners. In either case, the story is ultimately about people rather than institutions. Archaeology occasionally offers glimpses into those lives. Across the former Roman Empire, inscriptions carved into stone preserve fragments of personal histories. A veteran records his years of service. A soldier dedicates an altar to a deity. A family commissions a tombstone. Sometimes these inscriptions reveal remarkable details. We learn where a soldier was born, how long he served, and where he died. Through these small pieces of evidence, individuals emerge from the shadows of history. Yet for every inscription that survives, countless others have been lost. The vast majority of Roman soldiers left no trace that can be identified today. Their names disappeared. Their stories vanished. Only occasionally does a fragment survive long enough for us to encounter it centuries later. Perhaps that is one reason why the mystery of the 9th Legion remains so compelling. It represents something larger than the fate of a single military unit. It reminds us how much of the ancient world has been lost. We often focus on what historians know, but the unknown is equally important. Behind every surviving document lies a mountain of missing information. Behind every established fact lies a landscape of uncertainty. The 9th Legion sits precisely at the intersection of those two worlds. We know enough to recognize its importance. We know enough to follow parts of its journey. We know enough to understand that it served Rome for generations. Yet, when we reach the final chapter, certainty disappears. The trail grows faint. the evidence fragments. Historians are left piecing together possibilities rather than conclusions. And perhaps that is why the mystery continues to endure after nearly 2,000 years. It is not merely a question about where a Roman legion went. It is a reminder that history is never truly complete. No matter how much we discover, there will always be stories hidden beyond the reach of surviving evidence, waiting for future generations to uncover them. As the centuries passed, the Roman Empire itself would eventually experience the same fate that seems to have overtaken the Ninth Legion. It would slowly fade from the world it once dominated. Cities would decline, frontiers would collapse, roads would fall into disrepair. The institutions that once appeared permanent would disappear. Looking back from the modern world, it is easy to forget that the people living inside the empire could not see any of this coming. To them, Rome appeared eternal. This perspective is important because it helps us understand how the soldiers of the Ninth Legion viewed their own world. They were not living inside a mystery. They were not aware that historians would one day debate their fate. They were simply serving in what was arguably the most powerful state on earth. For a young recruit joining the Legion during the 1st or early 2nd century AD, the future likely seemed predictable. Training would begin immediately. New soldiers learned how to march in formation, maintain equipment, construct fortifications, and follow orders without hesitation. Discipline formed the foundation of military life. Roman commanders believed that an army's greatest strength was not courage, but organization. A brave soldier acting alone was far less valuable than an average soldier functioning as part of a disciplined unit. Training could be relentless. Ancient writers describe recruits marching long distances while carrying heavy equipment. They practiced with wooden weapons that were often heavier than those used in actual combat. They dug trenches, erected defenses, and repeated drills until movements became instinctive. The goal was simple. When chaos erupted on the battlefield, Roman soldiers would respond automatically. Over time, these men became professionals. Many spent decades in service. Some were born in Italy. Others came from Spain, Gaul, North Africa, the Balkans, or the eastern provinces. As the empire expanded, the Roman army became increasingly diverse. A single legion could contain men from different cultures and backgrounds, united by military service and loyalty to Rome. The Ninth Legion was no exception. By the time it reached Britain, generations of soldiers had already served beneath its eagle standard. The Legion carried with it a legacy that stretched back through civil wars, imperial expansion, and countless campaigns. New recruits inherited that legacy the moment they joined. To them, the Legion was more than an employer. It was an identity. When a soldier introduced himself, he might mention his legion before mentioning almost anything else. The bond between soldiers was strengthened by shared hardship. They marched together, trained together, and faced danger together. They slept in the same camps, endured the same weather, and depended on one another for survival. Friendships formed under conditions that few civilians could fully understand. This is one reason historians remain fascinated by the possibility of the Legion's destruction. If the traditional theory were correct, the disappearance of the Ninth would represent more than a military defeat. It would mean the sudden end of an entire community. Thousands of men, thousands of individual stories gone. The image is powerful, but it is worth remembering that history does not always conform to dramatic narratives. Consider the archaeological evidence once again. When the discoveries at Nijmegen became widely known, they forced scholars to rethink assumptions that had existed for generations. For a long time, the British destruction theory seemed almost unquestioned. It appeared in books, documentaries, and popular histories. Yet archaeology introduced doubt, and doubt is often where genuine historical investigation begins. The discoveries suggested that at least some elements of the Legion may have been present on the continent after its supposed destruction in Britain. This did not solve the mystery, but it changed the questions historians needed to ask. Instead of asking whether the Legion had been destroyed in Britain, researchers began asking where it might have gone afterward. Several possibilities emerged. One theory points towards the eastern frontier. During the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, Rome remained heavily engaged in the east. Conflicts with the Parthian Empire created constant military demands. Campaigns stretched across vast territories. Armies moved enormous distances. Casualties could be severe. The eastern provinces were among the wealthiest and most strategically important regions of the empire. They were also among the most volatile. A legion transferred there could easily find itself involved in major operations. If the Ninth Legion suffered catastrophic losses during one of these campaigns, the surviving evidence may simply be insufficient to reconstruct the event. Another possibility involves the Jewish revolts that challenged Roman authority during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. These conflicts were exceptionally destructive. Ancient sources describe brutal fighting, devastated settlements, and enormous casualties on both sides. Roman commanders often concentrated large military forces to suppress uprisings. A veteran legion such as the Ninth would have been a valuable asset in such circumstances. Again, however, direct evidence remains frustratingly absent. No surviving source clearly places the legion in a final battle. No inscription commemorates its destruction. No contemporary historian provides a definitive answer. And so the mystery continues. Yet perhaps the most interesting explanation is also the least dramatic. What if historians have been searching for a disaster that never occurred? What if the Ninth Legion gradually disappeared through administrative changes rather than military catastrophe? At first glance, this idea may seem unsatisfying. It lacks the excitement of an epic last stand. There are no heroic final battles or desperate marches into hostile territory. But history is often shaped by bureaucracy just as much as by warfare. The Roman military was a vast institution. Emperors regularly adjusted troop deployments. Units were reorganized to meet changing strategic needs. Administrative reforms occurred throughout the empire's history. A legion might be divided. Its soldiers might be transferred elsewhere. Its name might disappear from official records, while many of its personnel continued serving in different formations. Such processes were not unusual. The challenge is proving that this happened to the Ninth Legion. The evidence neither confirms nor completely rejects the possibility. Instead, historians find themselves trapped between competing explanations, each supported by fragments of information, but none supported by enough evidence to settle the debate. This situation is relatively rare in Roman history. Many major events can be reconstructed with reasonable confidence. The reigns of emperors, the outcomes of wars, and the locations of important battles are often known in considerable detail. The Ninth Legion occupies a different category. It exists in a gray area between certainty and speculation. Enough evidence survives to reveal part of the story. Not enough survives to reveal the ending. Perhaps this is why the mystery has remained so popular. People are naturally drawn to unanswered questions. A solved mystery becomes history. An unsolved mystery continues to capture the imagination. Every generation revisits the evidence. New excavations produce fresh clues. New interpretations emerge. Old assumptions are challenged. The discussion continues. Some scholars favor one theory. Others support another. None can claim complete victory. And so, the Ninth Legion remains suspended between history and legend. The soldiers who served within it could never have imagined such a fate. They likely expected to be remembered for victories, campaigns, and years of loyal service. Instead, they became famous for something entirely different: their disappearance. Nearly 2,000 years later, their story still survives because nobody can say with certainty how it ended. And in the world of history, that kind of mystery is exceptionally rare. One of the reasons the mystery of the Ninth Legion has survived for so long is that it sits at the perfect meeting point between evidence and imagination. There is enough historical information to prove that the Legion existed, enough archaeological evidence to trace parts of its journey, and enough uncertainty to leave room for debate. Most historical questions eventually become settled. New discoveries appear, scholars reach a broad consensus, and the argument slowly fades away. The Ninth Legion has resisted that process. Even today, historians continue to disagree about what probably happened, and every few years, a new study, excavation, or interpretation reopens the discussion. If we step back from the individual theories for a moment, another question emerges. Why are people so fascinated by disappearances in the first place? Throughout history, disappearances have captured the human imagination in a way that ordinary events rarely do. A battle with a clear outcome eventually becomes a historical fact. A city that rises and falls can be explained through economics, politics, and warfare. But when something vanishes without a clear explanation, the mind instinctively begins filling the gaps. The Ninth Legion is a perfect example. Had historians discovered a document stating that the Legion was destroyed during a particular campaign, the story would likely be known only to specialists. It would simply be another chapter in the long military history of Rome. Instead, the absence of certainty transformed it into something much larger. The mystery became a story, and stories tend to survive. Over the centuries, writers, historians, and enthusiasts have imagined countless endings for the Legion. Some pictured exhausted Roman soldiers marching into the wild landscapes of northern Britain, never to return. Others imagined desperate battles against overwhelming enemies somewhere beyond the empire's borders. Some envisioned survivors scattered across distant provinces, their legion gone, but their lives continuing beneath different banners. The reality may have been less dramatic, or perhaps even more dramatic. The truth is that we simply do not know. What we do know is that military disasters were not unknown in Roman history. Despite Rome's reputation for power and discipline, its armies occasionally suffered catastrophic defeats. One of the most famous examples occurred in the year 9 AD, more than a century before the 9th Legion disappears from the record. Deep within the forests of Germania, 3 Roman legions under the command of Varus were ambushed and destroyed. The defeat was so devastating that it shocked the empire. Ancient sources describe Emperor Augustus reportedly being overwhelmed with grief when he learned the news. According to tradition, he repeatedly cried out, "Varus, give me back my legions." Whether those exact words were spoken is impossible to know, but the story illustrates how seriously Rome regarded the loss of a legion. A legion was not merely a military formation. It represented years of investment, training, and experience. Replacing one was expensive. Replacing several could take decades. This is important because it demonstrates that Rome was capable of losing entire armies. The idea that the 9th Legion might have suffered destruction is not inherently impossible. Similar events occurred elsewhere in Roman history. The challenge lies in the lack of direct evidence. When the legions of Varus were destroyed, ancient writers documented the disaster. When other major military defeats occurred, they often attracted attention from contemporary historians. In the case of the 9th Legion, the silence remains difficult to explain. If thousands of soldiers died in a catastrophic battle, why do surviving sources fail to describe it? Some historians argue that the answer may be simpler than it appears. The ancient world preserved information unevenly. Entire books have vanished. Major historical works survive only in fragments. Some authors are known solely because later writers mentioned them. The loss of evidence has been so extensive that historians often compare it to attempting to reconstruct a library after most of its shelves have burned. Imagine a historian 2,000 years in the future trying to understand the modern world if only 1% of today's written material survived. Entire nations could disappear from the record. Major events might become obscure. Important figures could be forgotten. The gaps would be enormous. This perspective helps explain why the mystery remains unresolved. It is entirely possible that the answer once existed in documents that no longer survive. If that is true, the disappearance of the 9th Legion may not have been mysterious at all to the people living at the time. A Roman officer writing a report in the 2nd century AD may have known exactly what happened. A governor may have discussed it in correspondence. An imperial administrator may have filed the relevant paperwork. The mystery emerged only because those records eventually disappeared. This possibility highlights one of the most humbling aspects of historical research. Historians are limited by the evidence available to them. No amount of expertise can fully compensate for information that has been lost. Researchers can analyze inscriptions, compare texts, excavate archaeological sites, and develop sophisticated theories. But they cannot read documents that no longer exist. Sometimes the past refuses to provide complete answers. And yet, despite these limitations, remarkable discoveries continue to occur. Archaeology has transformed our understanding of Rome over the last century. Entire settlements have been uncovered. Military forts have been excavated. Thousands of artifacts have emerged from the ground. Each discovery contributes another piece to the puzzle. A single inscription can change long-held assumptions. A forgotten tablet can reveal unexpected details about military deployments. A buried structure can reshape understanding of an entire region. For this reason, historians remain cautious about declaring the mystery solved. Future discoveries may yet alter the picture. Somewhere beneath a modern city, a farmer's field, or an unexcavated archaeological site, evidence connected to the Ninth Legion may still exist. Perhaps a military record waits to be uncovered. Perhaps an inscription bearing the name of the Legion remains buried beneath layers of soil. Perhaps a future discovery will reveal exactly where the soldiers went and what became of them. Until then, the story remains unfinished. What makes the Ninth Legion particularly fascinating is that its disappearance occurred during a period when Rome appeared strong and stable. This was not an empire in obvious decline. The 2nd century AD is often considered one of the high points of Roman civilization. Trade flourished, cities expanded, monumental architecture transformed the urban landscape. The empire's frontiers were heavily defended. From the perspective of many Romans, the future likely appeared secure. Yet even at moments of apparent stability, uncertainty existed beneath the surface. Frontier wars continued. Political tensions remained. Disease, rebellion, and military conflict never disappeared entirely. History rarely unfolds as smoothly as it appears in retrospect. The fate of the Ninth Legion serves as a reminder of that reality. Beneath the grand narrative of emperors and conquests were countless smaller stories, many of which have been lost. Individual soldiers lived, fought, and died without knowing whether anyone would remember them. Entire communities rose and vanished. Documents were written and forgotten. Generations passed. The empire changed, and somewhere during those changes, the trail of the Ninth Legion faded from view. Perhaps that is the most enduring lesson of this mystery. History is not a complete record of the past. It is a collection of surviving fragments. Sometimes, those fragments fit neatly together. Sometimes, they do not. The story of the Ninth Legion survives precisely because one important piece is missing. For nearly 2,000 years, historians have searched for that missing piece. They continue searching today, and until it is found, the Ninth Legion will remain exactly where it has stood for centuries, half illuminated by evidence, half concealed by the shadows of history. By this point, it may be tempting to think of the Ninth Legion only in terms of its disappearance. After all, that is the reason most people know its name today. Yet there is something important that often gets overlooked. The real story is not simply about how the Legion vanished. The real story is about how long it survived before that happened. For well over a century, perhaps even longer, the Ninth Legion served one of the most demanding military organizations in human history. Generations of soldiers came and went beneath its eagle standard. Empires rose and fell around them. Political systems changed. Emperors succeeded one another. Through all of it, the Legion endured. When we speak about Rome today, it is easy to imagine a civilization that existed in a permanent state of power and stability. In reality, the Roman world was constantly changing. Civil wars erupted, frontiers shifted, entire regions experienced periods of unrest. The fact that a military unit could survive across multiple generations was an achievement in itself. Consider the life of a young recruit arriving at a Roman fortress for the first time. He may have traveled hundreds of miles from his birthplace. Perhaps he came from a farming village in Gaul. Perhaps he grew up in Spain, Italy, or one of the provinces along the Rhine. The journey alone could take weeks. Upon arrival, he would enter a world governed by routine. Before sunrise, soldiers were already awake. Equipment had to be maintained, weapons inspected, orders received, training conducted. The Roman army functioned because it transformed thousands of individuals into a disciplined system. The process was not always pleasant. Marches could be exhausting. Discipline could be harsh. Mistakes were punished. Yet the rewards were significant. Regular pay, food, equipment, and the possibility of advancement attracted recruits from across the empire. Many soldiers spent the majority of their adult lives in service. For them, the legion became a second family. When historians discuss the disappearance of the Ninth Legion, they often focus on military movements and political events. But behind those events were real human beings. Men who worried about survival, friendships, promotions, injuries, and the uncertain future that awaited them after retirement. Some likely dreamed of returning home with enough savings to purchase land. Others may have hoped to settle near the places where they served. Many never lived long enough to make either choice. Life expectancy in the ancient world was far lower than it is today. Disease, accidents, and warfare claimed countless lives. Even soldiers who survived combat faced dangers that modern armies rarely encounter. Infections from minor wounds could become deadly. Harsh weather could weaken entire units. Food supplies occasionally failed. Medical knowledge, while impressive for its time, remained limited. Yet despite these hardships, the Roman military system continued functioning generation after generation. The Ninth Legion was one piece of that enormous machine. And perhaps this is what makes its disappearance so striking. Not because legions could be destroyed. That happened occasionally. Not because records could be lost. That happened constantly. But because the Ninth had become such an established part of Rome's military world, that historians naturally expect to know how its story ended. Imagine reading a long novel and discovering that the final chapter is missing. You know the characters, you understand the setting. You have followed the story for hundreds of pages. Then suddenly, the narrative stops. That is essentially the situation historians face with the Ninth Legion. The beginning is reasonably clear. Large portions of the middle are visible. The ending remains uncertain. This uncertainty has allowed the Legion to occupy a unique place in popular imagination. Many Roman military units served with distinction. Few became legends. The Ninth achieved something unusual. Its mystery made it famous. Modern novels, documentaries, films, and television programs have repeatedly returned to the story because unanswered questions possess a unique appeal. Audiences are naturally drawn toward mysteries that resist simple solutions. Yet the historical reality remains more interesting than many fictional versions. The truth is that historians are not dealing with a complete absence of evidence. they possess clues. The challenge is that the clues point in different directions. Some suggest continued service beyond Britain. Others suggest a disappearance during the early 2nd century. Still others raise the possibility that administrative changes altered the legion's identity. Each interpretation explains part of the evidence. None explains all of it. This situation is familiar to archaeologists. Rarely does the past reveal itself in a perfectly organized manner. Excavations produce fragments rather than complete stories. A broken inscription survives while the rest of the monument disappears. A military diploma is discovered while the records explaining its context are lost. Historians must constantly work with incomplete information. The process resembles assembling a puzzle when many pieces are missing. Sometimes the overall picture becomes clear. Sometimes several possible pictures remain equally plausible. The 9th Legion belongs firmly in the second category. One reason the debate continues is that new discoveries often create additional questions rather than definitive answers. When archaeologists uncovered evidence linking the Legion to the Netherlands, some historians viewed the mystery as essentially solved. The Legion had survived Britain. Therefore, the traditional destruction theory must be wrong. But the situation turned out to be more complicated. The discoveries demonstrated that the Legion may have been present on the continent. They did not reveal what happened afterward. Instead of solving the mystery, the evidence simply moved it to a different location. The disappearance remained. Only the setting changed. In some ways, that development made the story even more fascinating. If the Legion survived Britain, then where did it go? What campaigns did it participate in? Who commanded it? How long did it continue operating? And perhaps most importantly, why does its name eventually vanish? These questions continue to generate debate among scholars. Some favor Eastern campaigns. Others favor conflicts closer to Europe's northern frontiers. Still others argue that historians have exaggerated the mystery altogether. The fact that respected experts can reach different conclusions demonstrates how uncertain the evidence remains. And uncertainty is rare in an age when information often appears instantly available. Modern people are accustomed to answers. Search engines provide information in seconds. Maps reveal distant locations immediately. Records are stored digitally. The ancient world was very different. Information traveled slowly. Documents were copied by hand. Knowledge could disappear when a library burned or a building collapsed. The mystery of the 9th Legion reminds us of that reality. For all of Rome's administrative sophistication, it existed in a world where information could be surprisingly fragile. A few lost documents may be all that separates us from a complete understanding of the story. Imagine for a moment that somewhere beneath the ruins of an ancient fort lies a wooden writing tablet preserved by unusual conditions. On that tablet is a report written by a Roman officer nearly 2,000 years ago. Perhaps it records troop movements. Perhaps it mentions a battle. Perhaps it explains exactly what happened to the 9th Legion. Such discoveries are not impossible. Archaeologists have uncovered extraordinary artifacts before. Entire archives have survived in unexpected places. Letters, military records, personal accounts, and official documents have emerged from deserts, rivers, and buried settlements. History occasionally surprises us. Perhaps one day it will surprise us again. Until then, the Ninth Legion remains suspended between what is known and what is unknown. Its soldiers marched across provinces, crossed seas, built forts, fought enemies, and served an empire that seemed destined to last forever. Their names are mostly forgotten. Their final chapter remains uncertain. Yet because that chapter is missing, their story continues to be told. And nearly 2,000 years after the Legion disappeared from the historical record, people are still asking the same question. What happened to the Ninth Legion? If there is one thing the mystery of the Ninth Legion teaches us, it is that history is often far less complete than it appears. When people think about the ancient world, they usually imagine that historians possess a detailed record of major events. In reality, much of what we know survives almost by accident. A stone inscription escapes destruction. A manuscript is copied by a medieval monk. A military diploma remains buried in the soil until archaeologists uncover it centuries later. The survival of evidence is rarely predictable. This is especially true when studying the Roman army. At first glance, Rome seems unusually well documented. The empire left behind roads, forts, walls, monuments, inscriptions, and written histories. Yet, when historians attempt to reconstruct the lives of ordinary soldiers, they quickly encounter limitations. Most Roman soldiers never wrote books. Most officers left behind little information. Even large military operations can become difficult to trace if surviving records are incomplete. The Ninth Legion exists within this world of partial evidence. We know enough to follow parts of its journey, but not enough to see the entire path. And perhaps nowhere is that uncertainty more visible than in the years surrounding Emperor Hadrian's visit to Britain. When Hadrian became emperor in 117 AD, he inherited a vast empire stretching across 3 continents. Unlike some of his predecessors, Hadrian spent much of his reign traveling. He visited provinces throughout the Roman world, inspecting military installations, reviewing troops, and strengthening imperial administration. His visit to Britain remains one of the most significant moments in the province's history. The frontier had become increasingly unstable. Rome needed a more permanent solution to the challenges posed by northern tribes. The result was one of the most famous construction projects in ancient history, Hadrian's Wall. Stretching across northern Britain, the wall was not merely a defensive barrier. It was a statement of imperial power. It demonstrated Rome's ability to organize labor, transport materials, and impose order on distant territories. Forts were built along its length. Roads connected military positions. Thousands of soldiers participated in its construction and maintenance. For modern visitors, the wall appears as a historic monument. For Roman soldiers, it was part of daily life. Imagine standing atop the frontier on a cold morning. To the south lies the organized world of Roman Britain. Forts, roads, settlements, and military outposts connect the province to the wider empire. To the north stretches a landscape that remains outside direct Roman control. The wall marks the boundary between those worlds. Generations of soldiers would spend their lives guarding it. If the Ninth Legion still existed during this period, its soldiers would have witnessed these transformations firsthand. They would have watched the frontier evolve from a loosely defined military zone into one of the most heavily fortified borders in the empire. Yet even here, certainty remains elusive. The problem is not a lack of possibilities. The problem is too many possibilities. Every new piece of evidence creates additional interpretations. One historian may see proof that the legion survived longer than previously believed. Another may interpret the same evidence differently. Neither position can be proven beyond doubt. This is one reason historical mysteries often persist for centuries. The available information is sufficient to support multiple explanations. The Ninth Legion provides a textbook example. Suppose the legion was transferred from Britain to continental Europe. That would explain the evidence discovered in the Netherlands. But what happened next? Did the legion continue serving for years afterward? Did it participate in Eastern campaigns? Did it suffer losses during frontier wars? Was it eventually dissolved for administrative reasons? Each possibility remains plausible, yet none can be demonstrated conclusively. The further historians move beyond the surviving evidence, the more careful they must become. Speculation can be useful. It encourages new questions and new avenues of research. But speculation is not the same as proof. This distinction is important because popular versions of the story sometimes blur the line between fact and possibility. Films and novels often present a dramatic final battle in Britain as if it were established history. The image is compelling. Roman soldiers marching into the wilderness, a desperate struggle against overwhelming odds, an entire legion disappearing beyond the frontier. There is nothing impossible about such a scenario. The problem is that evidence for it remains limited. Historians today generally prefer caution. The most honest answer is often the least satisfying one. We do not know. That uncertainty frustrates some people. Others find it fascinating. In many ways, the mystery has become more famous than the Legion itself. Ask a historian about the Ninth Legion, and the conversation will almost immediately turn toward its disappearance. Yet the Legion's long history is equally remarkable. For generations, its soldiers served across the Roman world. They participated in campaigns, built fortifications, defended frontiers, and contributed to the expansion of one of history's greatest empires. Their achievements were real, even if their ending remains uncertain. Perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate. At its heart, the mystery is not really about military records or archaeological evidence. It is about human curiosity. People naturally want complete stories. We want to know how things end. When a question remains unanswered, it lingers in the imagination. The Ninth Legion has lingered for nearly 2,000 years. Entire generations of historians have examined the evidence. New technologies have been applied to old questions. Archaeological methods have improved dramatically. Excavations continue across former Roman territories. And still, the mystery survives. There is something almost poetic about that. The Roman Empire devoted enormous effort to preserving order. Officials recorded information. Administrators managed provinces. Military commanders submitted reports. Bureaucracies tracked supplies, personnel, and finances. Rome attempted to organize the world around it. Yet despite all of that organization, one of its most famous military units slipped into uncertainty. The records end. The evidence fragments. The story becomes difficult to follow. And the centuries pass. The soldiers themselves could never have imagined such a fate. Most were concerned with immediate realities. The next patrol, the next construction project, the next military campaign. Their lives were shaped by practical concerns rather than historical legacy. They could not know that future generations would debate their fate. They could not know that archaeologists would spend years studying fragments of inscriptions bearing the name of their legion. They could not know that people living 2 millennia later would still discuss them. Yet, here we are, separated from those soldiers by nearly 2,000 years, separated by languages, cultures, technologies, and ways of life, and still asking questions about their story. That connection across time is one of the most remarkable aspects of history. The past is never entirely gone. Fragments survive, clues remain, questions endure. And sometimes those questions become more memorable than the answers. The Ninth Legion may never reveal all of its secrets. It is entirely possible that the final evidence has already been lost forever. But even if that is true, the mystery still serves a purpose. It reminds us that history is not simply a collection of facts. It is an ongoing investigation, a search for understanding, a conversation between the present and the past. And few conversations have lasted as long or remained as intriguing as the search for the fate of Rome's vanished Ninth Legion. To better understand the mystery of the Ninth Legion, it helps to leave behind emperors, historians, and archaeological debates for a moment and focus instead on the people who actually served within the legion. After all, when we speak about the disappearance of the Ninth Legion, we are not really talking about a name carved onto stone or a line in an ancient document. We are talking about thousands of human beings, men who woke before sunrise, marched across difficult terrain, endured harsh weather, followed orders, and spent years of their lives serving Rome. The further we travel into the past, the easier it becomes to think in terms of large numbers rather than individuals. A legion contained thousands of soldiers. An army contained tens of thousands. Entire campaigns involved enormous populations. Yet each of those numbers was made up of people whose daily lives were often surprisingly ordinary. Imagine a young recruit arriving at a Roman fortress in Britain sometime during the late 1st century AD. Perhaps he has never traveled far from home before. Perhaps he comes from a small farming settlement somewhere in Gaul, modern-day France. Maybe he was raised in Spain, northern Italy, or one of the provinces along the Rhine. Wherever he was born, the journey to Britain would likely feel like entering a different world. The climate alone could be shocking. Many Roman soldiers complained about Britain's weather. Ancient writers described endless rain, cold winds, and grey skies. To recruits from warmer regions of the empire, the island probably seemed distant and unfamiliar. Upon arrival, the new soldier would immediately enter a strict military routine. The Roman army valued discipline above almost everything else. A recruit's first months were often the most difficult. Training was intense. Marching formed a major part of military life. Roman soldiers routinely covered long distances while carrying heavy equipment. Historians still debate the exact weight, but it was substantial. Weapons, armor, tools, food supplies, cooking equipment, and personal belongings all had to be transported. A soldier learned quickly that serving Rome required endurance. Training exercises were designed to be harder than real combat whenever possible. Wooden practice swords weighed more than actual swords. Training shields could be heavier than battlefield equipment. The idea was simple. If a soldier became accustomed to difficult conditions during training, actual combat would feel easier by comparison. The Roman military was not interested in creating individual heroes. It wanted reliable professionals. A legion succeeded because thousands of soldiers worked together as a single system. Every man had a role. Every movement mattered. Discipline transformed individuals into an effective fighting force. A typical day could begin before dawn. Orders would be distributed. Equipment would be inspected. Guards returning from night duty would report anything unusual. Meals were prepared. Work assignments were issued. Contrary to popular belief, soldiers did not spend most of their time fighting. Much of their service involved construction. Roman armies built roads that connected distant provinces. They constructed bridges capable of supporting thousands of men. They erected watchtowers, forts, defensive walls, storage facilities, and administrative buildings. Many historians have joked that Roman soldiers spent nearly as much time digging as they did fighting. The joke contains more truth than exaggeration. A legion on campaign could build an entire fortified camp in a single day. Ditches were excavated, earthworks were raised, wooden defenses were assembled. By nightfall, an army that had spent the day marching could be protected behind substantial fortifications. This ability helped explain Rome's extraordinary military success. The soldiers of the 9th Legion almost certainly performed these tasks countless times. Across Britain, traces of Roman engineering still survive. Roads once marched across the countryside in remarkably straight lines. Fortifications protected strategic locations. Military settlements gradually evolved into permanent communities. Behind many of these projects stood soldiers whose names are now forgotten. Life inside a Roman fortress followed a rhythm that rarely changed. Routine provided stability. Weapons had to be maintained, armor repaired, horses cared for, buildings inspected, supplies inventoried. The Roman army depended upon organization, and organization required constant effort. Yet despite the routine, danger was never far away. A frontier province such as Britain presented unique challenges. Raids could occur unexpectedly. Patrols might encounter hostile groups. Small skirmishes sometimes erupted with little warning. The further north Roman forces operated, the more uncertain conditions often became. For soldiers stationed near the frontier, vigilance was a way of life. Imagine standing guard during a winter night. The temperature drops. Wind moves across the landscape. Visibility is poor. Beyond the limits of the fort lies darkness. Somewhere beyond that darkness are people who may view Rome as an occupying power rather than a source of order. Every sound becomes significant. Every movement attracts attention. Hours pass slowly. For countless soldiers of the 9th Legion, such experiences were completely normal. And yet military service was not defined solely by hardship. Soldiers formed friendships. They celebrated victories. They shared meals and stories. Many spent more time with fellow soldiers than with their own families. The bonds created under such conditions could be remarkably strong. A recruit arriving at the fortress as a stranger might eventually find himself surrounded by men he trusted with his life. These relationships helped sustain morale during difficult campaigns. Military service also offered opportunities. Roman soldiers received pay. Successful service could lead to promotions. Veterans often received benefits after completing their terms. For many men, enlistment represented a path toward greater stability and social advancement. The army was demanding, but it could also be rewarding. This is one reason the Ninth Legion endured for so long. It was not merely a military institution. It was a community that constantly renewed itself. Older veterans passed knowledge to younger recruits. Traditions survived across generations. The Legion developed an identity that extended beyond any individual soldier. When historians discuss the disappearance of the Ninth Legion, it is easy to focus on the mystery itself. But before the mystery came a long history of service. Thousands of men lived significant portions of their lives beneath the Legion's eagle standard. They marched across provinces, constructed roads, defended frontiers, and contributed to the functioning of an empire that stretched across much of the known world. Whatever eventually happened to the Legion, those years were real. The soldiers existed. Their experiences mattered. And in many ways, understanding their lives brings us closer to understanding the mystery itself. Because if the Ninth Legion truly disappeared, whether through destruction, reorganization, or some other fate, it was not simply a military unit that vanished. It was a community, a brotherhood forged through shared hardship, a collection of thousands of individual stories. And somewhere within those stories may lie the answer that historians have been searching for ever since. In the next part of our journey, we will examine the enemies who stood across the frontier from Rome and explore the dangerous world that surrounded the Ninth Legion during its years in Britain. Understanding those opponents may bring us one step closer to understanding what fate ultimately awaited Rome's most mysterious legion. To understand why so many historians once believed the Ninth Legion disappeared in Britain, we need to understand the people who lived beyond Rome's northern frontier. To many Romans, Britain already felt distant from the center of the empire. Beyond the frontier, the landscape seemed even more remote. Dense forests, rolling hills, marshes, and rugged terrain created conditions that often favored local tribes over Roman armies. Ancient Roman writers frequently described these northern peoples as fierce warriors. While such accounts were sometimes exaggerated, there is little doubt that the frontier could be a dangerous place. The tribes living beyond direct Roman control understood the landscape far better than any invading force. They knew the routes through forests, the safest river crossings, and the locations where an ambush might succeed. This created challenges for Rome. The Roman army excelled in open battle. Discipline, organization, and training allowed legions to defeat larger enemies again and again. But frontier warfare was often different. Small raids, surprise attacks, and sudden disappearances could prove just as frustrating as major battles. A Roman commander preferred certainty. The frontier offered very little of it. Even after decades of occupation, large parts of northern Britain remained difficult to control completely. Soldiers stationed there lived with constant uncertainty. Patrols could encounter resistance. Supply routes required protection. Intelligence was often incomplete. This environment helped create the legend of the Ninth Legion. When later generations learned that the legion's fate was uncertain, many naturally imagined a final campaign somewhere beyond Rome's secure borders. The theory was appealing because it fit the realities of frontier warfare. Whether it was true is another matter entirely. What we know for certain is that Britain was one of the most demanding provinces in the Roman Empire. Any legion stationed there faced years of difficult service, and the Ninth Legion spent much of its existence operating in exactly those conditions. Whatever happened to the legion, its soldiers served on one of Rome's most challenging frontiers, and that alone helps explain why their story survived. After centuries of debate, dozens of books, and countless archaeological discoveries, historians have narrowed the mystery of the Ninth Legion to a handful of realistic possibilities. The first possibility is the most famous. The legion was destroyed in Britain. This remains the version that appears most often in popular culture. A legion marches north, encounters overwhelming resistance, and disappears from history. It is dramatic, memorable, and easy to visualize. The problem is that direct evidence remains limited. The discoveries in the Netherlands strongly suggest that the legion may have existed after its supposed destruction in Britain. If those discoveries are interpreted correctly, then the traditional explanation becomes difficult to defend. The second possibility is that the legion survived Britain and was later destroyed elsewhere in the empire. This theory is attractive because it explains both the British and continental evidence. The legion leaves Britain, serves elsewhere, and eventually suffers destruction during a campaign whose records do not survive. Many historians consider this one of the more plausible explanations. The third possibility is that no dramatic disaster occurred at all. The legion may have been reorganized, merged, or dissolved as part of administrative changes within the Roman military system. While less exciting, this theory cannot be dismissed. Roman armies evolved continuously. Names disappeared. Units changed structure. Soldiers were reassigned. From the perspective of modern historians, such changes can create mysteries that never seemed mysterious to the people living at the time. The truth is that every theory explains part of the evidence. None explains everything, and that is why the mystery remains unsolved. After nearly 2,000 years, historians still cannot point to a single piece of evidence and declare the case closed. The final answer remains hidden somewhere beyond the surviving record. In the end, the story of the Ninth Legion is not really about a disappearance. It is about the limits of historical knowledge. The Roman Empire left behind roads, walls, fortresses, monuments, inscriptions, and countless written records. Yet even within one of the best documented civilizations of the ancient world, uncertainty survives. The soldiers of the Ninth Legion could never have imagined that future generations would spend centuries discussing their fate. To them, life was immediate. The next march, the next patrol, the next construction project, the next campaign. Like millions of people throughout history, they lived without knowing how future generations would remember them. And yet, they were remembered, not because of a famous victory, not because of a celebrated commander, but because their final chapter seems to be missing. Perhaps the legion was destroyed in battle. Perhaps it continued serving under another name. Perhaps the answer once existed in a document that has long since vanished. We may never know. What we do know is that the Ninth Legion served Rome for generations. Its soldiers crossed seas, built fortresses, defended frontiers, and helped shape the history of an empire that influenced the world for centuries. That achievement alone would have been enough to secure its place in history. The mystery simply ensured that it would never be forgotten. And so nearly 2,000 years after the last certain reference to the Legion appeared, the question remains exactly where it has always been. What happened to the Ninth Legion? For now, the answer remains hidden somewhere in the shadows of the Roman past. As we reach the end of this journey, it is worth taking one final look at the world the Ninth Legion inhabited. Nearly 2,000 years separate us from the soldiers whose story we have been following. The empire they served is gone. The emperors who commanded them are long dead. The forts they built have become ruins. In some places, entire Roman settlements disappeared beneath later cities. In others, nature slowly reclaimed roads and walls that once seemed permanent. Yet traces remain. A carved stone discovered by an archaeologist. A fragment of pottery buried beneath a field. The remains of a fort overlooking a river. A weathered inscription carrying the name of a legion. Small pieces of evidence scattered across Europe and beyond continue to connect us with people who lived in a world almost impossible to imagine today. For the soldiers of the Ninth Legion, the Roman Empire was not history. It was the present. It was the world around them. Many of them likely believed Rome would last forever. That belief was understandable. The empire stretched from Britain to the Middle East. Its armies guarded vast frontiers. Its merchants crossed seas. Its laws governed millions of people. Its cities contained magnificent temples, theaters, baths, and monuments. From the perspective of an ordinary soldier, Rome must have seemed unstoppable. And yet history has a way of humbling even the most powerful civilizations. Kingdoms rise, empires expand, generations pass. Then slowly, often so slowly that nobody notices at first, everything changes. The Roman Empire itself would eventually fade into history, just as countless civilizations before it had done. Perhaps that is one reason the mystery of the Ninth Legion continues to resonate. In a strange way, the Legion's story mirrors the story of Rome itself. Both appear powerful, both seem permanent, and then, over time, both begin to disappear from view. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. One document is lost, one building collapses, one generation replaces another. Eventually, certainty gives way to memory, and memory gives way to mystery. The soldiers of the Ninth Legion could not know this future. They did not know that historians would debate their fate centuries later. They did not know that archaeologists would search for clues buried beneath the earth. They did not know that people living in a completely different age would still be fascinated by their story. For them, life continued one day at a time. They marched when ordered. They stood watch through cold nights. They repaired roads and fortifications. They crossed rivers. They endured rain, mud, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Most of them probably expected to be forgotten. In many ways, they were right. The names of most soldiers who served in the 9th Legion have vanished from history. Their faces are unknown. Their voices are lost. Their personal stories disappeared long ago. And yet, somehow the Legion itself survived. Not physically, not as a military unit, but as a question, a mystery, a story. Sometimes that is enough. History is filled with famous victories and powerful rulers, yet many of those stories eventually become settled. The facts are known. The conclusions are accepted. The debates come to an end. The 9th Legion followed a different path. Its uncertainty kept it alive. Every generation returned to the question. Every new discovery reignited the discussion. Every missing piece of evidence encouraged another theory. The mystery endured because it was never fully solved. And perhaps it never will be. It is entirely possible that the final answer disappeared centuries ago. The decisive document may have been destroyed. The critical inscription may have been broken apart and lost. The evidence historians need may no longer exist. If that is true, then the mystery of the 9th Legion will remain exactly that, a mystery. But there is something valuable in that uncertainty. It reminds us that history is not a completed book sitting on a shelf. It is an ongoing investigation. Every generation inherits fragments of the past and attempts to understand them. Sometimes the fragments fit together neatly. Sometimes they leave unanswered questions. The 9th Legion remains one of those questions, and perhaps that is why its story feels so human. Not because we know everything that happened, but because we do not. There is a natural temptation to think of history as a collection of facts, dates, and events. Yet history is also shaped by absence, by missing records, by forgotten lives, by stories that survive only in fragments. The 9th Legion stands at the center of that reality. We know it existed. We know it served Rome. We know it marched across distant lands and played a role in the history of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. Beyond that, the shadows begin, and somewhere within those shadows lies the answer historians have searched for over centuries. Perhaps one day, a new discovery will reveal the truth. Perhaps an inscription will emerge from the ground. Perhaps an overlooked document will be identified. Perhaps a future archaeologist will uncover the clue that generations have been missing. Until then, the story remains unfinished. The soldiers of the 9th Legion march out of the historical record just as they marched through the frontiers of the Roman world, disciplined, determined, and disappearing slowly into the distance. Their destination remains unknown. Their fate remains uncertain. But their story endures. And nearly 2,000 years later, the mystery of Rome's vanished 9th Legion continues to remind us that even the greatest civilizations can leave behind unanswered questions. Somewhere beyond the reach of surviving evidence, the final chapter still waits. And for now, it remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient world.